You've entered a quieter place, one where stories unfold slowly, one where time moves gently and every word is softened by silence. In tonight's journey, we will revisit 10 unsolved mysteries, true stories, cold cases that linger at the edge of memory, each one told not with fear, but with stillness. These are not tales of horror, but of questions left unanswered, of people who vanished, and moments that never found their ending. Let the rain settle. Let your breath slow. Whether you are here to rest or simply to listen, this time is yours. The cases begin now. It was a quiet, cold afternoon in early February of 2004. Maura Murray, a 21-year-old nursing student at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, sent her professors an email. She told them she would be missing class for a few days due to a family emergency. But that emergency never happened. Maura had made no plans with her family. There'd been no death, no illness, and no crisis. Instead, she quietly packed a small bag. She gathered clothes, a few personal items, her textbooks, and her favorite stuffed animal. Then she withdrew nearly all the money from her bank account, just under $300. She visited a liquor store nearby, buying some alcohol. And then she got into her black Saturn sedan and began driving north. She didn't tell her friends. She didn't call her boyfriend. She didn't leave a note behind. But maps and printed directions found later in her car suggested she may have been heading toward the White Mountains in New Hampshire, a quiet, wooded area she had visited before. That night, just after 7 at night, a woman living on a rural road in Haverhill, New Hampshire, heard a loud noise. When she looked out her window, she saw a car had slid off the road into a snowbank. She called the police. Another neighbor came outside and approached the crash. A young woman stood by the car. She appeared uninjured, but nervous. She told the neighbor she didn't need help. She said she had already called roadside assistance, but there was no cell service in that area. That call had never been made. The police arrived a few minutes later, but the driver was gone. The car Maura had been driving was still there. The front bumper was damaged. The airbags had deployed. Inside were her school materials, a half-empty box of wine, and a packed bag of clothes and toiletries. But outside, the snow was undisturbed. There were no footprints leading into the woods. No signs of a struggle. Just the frozen silence of a backroad winter evening. In the days that followed, search teams began scouring the area. Helicopters flew over the forest canopy. Cadaver dogs followed short scent trails that ended abruptly. Volunteers in heavy coats walked side by side through the snow, hoping to find a glove, a shoe, anything at all. But nothing was found. Maura's father, Fred Murray, arrived quickly. He began searching on his own. He urged police to treat the case as a crime. He believed someone had taken his daughter that night, perhaps shortly after the crash. But there was no evidence of a kidnapping, no signs of violence, no witnesses who saw anyone else at the scene. With no clear indication of foul play, other theories began to circulate. Some believed she had simply walked into the woods and died from exposure. Others thought she might have staged the crash, trying to run away and start over. A few suspected suicide. But none of those theories have ever been confirmed. And Maura's body has never been found. Years passed. The trail went cold. But in time, her case took on a second life online. On forums, podcasts, and YouTube channels, the case became one of the most discussed disappearances in the country. Internet sleuths reviewed timelines, compared police reports, and analyzed every detail from her final days. In 2021, interest in the case grew again when ground-penetrating radar suggested something unusual beneath a concrete slab on a nearby property. Some believed it might be a shallow grave. But after excavation, nothing was discovered. There were no bones, no clothing, no clues, just more questions. To this day, no one knows why Maura left campus. No one knows where she was headed. No one saw what happened after the crash. Her disappearance has remained a haunting, unresolved mystery for over 20 years. What we know is this: a young woman left college without a word. She drove for hours into the snowy mountains. Her car was found locked and abandoned on a quiet road. Her belongings were still inside. There were no footprints in the snow, and she was never seen again. What happened to Maura Murray may never be fully understood, but her story remains. A cold wind through the trees, an open question beneath the frost, and a silence that still lingers. Let us now drift quietly into the next mystery. One born from fear, jazz, and the echo of footsteps after midnight. In the summer of 1918, New Orleans was a city caught between noise and silence. The world was still recovering from the war. The Spanish flu was beginning to spread across the globe. And beneath the canopy of humid nights and jazz-soaked alleyways, something darker was rising. The first attack came on May 23rd. Joseph and Catherine Maggio, a young couple who owned a corner grocery, were found murdered in their apartment above the shop. Their throats had been slashed with a razor. They had both been struck in the head with an axe. It was brutal. It was sudden. It was unlike anything the city had seen. The killer had used the couple's own axe. The back door had been chiseled open, but nothing was stolen. No valuables were missing. There was no clear motive. Only silence left behind. The city was shaken, but many believed it was an isolated crime. A robbery gone wrong. A personal vendetta. But 3 weeks later, it happened again. On June 27th, Louis Basumer and his companion, Harriet Loa, were attacked while sleeping in the quarters behind his small store. Both were struck in the head with an axe. Louis survived with serious injuries. Harriet clung to life for several weeks before passing away from complications. As before, nothing was taken. The attacker had entered quietly and vanished into the night. The fear began to spread. In early August, a woman named Anna Schneider was attacked in her bed. She was 8 months pregnant. Though struck multiple times, she survived and days later gave birth to a healthy baby girl. She could offer no description of her attacker. No footsteps were heard. No break-in was noticed until it was too late. The attacks kept coming, each one with the same signature. Joseph Romano, an elderly man, was killed in his home by another axe strike to the head. His nieces, who lived with him, caught a glimpse of someone fleeing the scene. A large man in dark clothing disappearing into the street. But again, no one was caught. Panic took hold. Police tried desperately to calm the public. They arrested suspects with weak evidence, hoping to ease the tension. But the attacks didn't stop. Each time, the back door had been pried open or a panel had been removed. Each time, the killer used the victim's own axe. And each time, nothing was taken. People began to speculate. Was the Axeman targeting a specific group? Many of the early victims were of Italian descent and worked as grocers. But later, Victims didn't fit that pattern. Some were young, others old. Men, women, even children. The only constant was that they were attacked in their sleep, in their own homes, without warning. Then came the letter. On March 13th, 1919, the New Orleans Times-Picayune received a strange note. It was written in theatrical, rambling language. The author claimed to be the Axeman. He referred to himself as Spirit, a being from the depths of hell, and claimed he could move through the city unseen. The most chilling part of the letter was an offer. He wrote that on the night of March 19th, he would pass over New Orleans. But anyone playing jazz music in their home would be spared. Anyone who did not play jazz would be in danger. That night, the city erupted in sound. Dance halls were packed. Jazz bands played in homes, in bars, on street corners. People huddled together, playing records or singing softly to themselves. Some didn't sleep at all, waiting in the dark for something that never came. And indeed, no one was killed that night. But the Axeman wasn't finished. He struck again in August, attacking Steve Boca in his home. Then in September, Sarah Lauman was assaulted in much the same way. Both survived, but couldn't identify their attacker. Then, in October, came the final known murder. Mike Pepitone was killed in his bedroom, his head crushed by an axe. His wife and children were in the home. She saw a figure flee the scene, but couldn't describe him. And then, just like that, it ended. No more letters. No more attacks. No confessions. The Axeman disappeared. Over the years, theories have been endless. Some believed the killer was part of a local gang or the mafia. Others thought it was a madman living in plain sight. A few even suggested the crimes were unrelated, carried out by copycats, stitched together by fear. But the details were too specific. The pattern too precise. To this day, the Axeman of New Orleans remains one of America's most chilling unsolved cases. No one knows why he started. No one knows why he stopped. And no one has ever been brought to justice. The jazz has faded. The streets have changed. But his shadow lingers still in the quiet corners of a city that never forgot. Let us now travel farther back to another city and another haunting. A case of a child, of confusion, and of a box in the woods that should have never been opened. In the cold gray of February, 1957, just outside Philadelphia, a man checking animal traps in a quiet wooded area made a discovery that would haunt the city for decades. Lying in a discarded cardboard box was the body of a young boy. He was around 4 or 5 years old, small, fragile. His hair had been freshly cut. His body was bruised, wrapped in a simple plaid blanket. The box had once held a baby bassinet sold by a local department store. No name, no identification, just the lifeless form of a child. The man who found him didn't report it right away. Fear of the police kept him silent. Days later, a college student walking in the same area came across the box and alerted authorities. The investigation began immediately, but even from the start, the questions outnumbered the answers. The boy's face had been carefully cleaned, his fingernails trimmed. His hair, though recently cut, had bits of it still clinging to his body, as if the grooming had been rushed or done in poor lighting. There were signs of malnourishment. He had faded scars on his ankle and groin, and a strange L-shaped mark beneath his chin. Some investigators believed he had suffered abuse. Others thought he may have been ill or institutionalized. The police circulated over 400,000 flyers. They checked every missing child report from the region. They followed leads across states. They dressed a young officer in period clothing and posed him with a similar box, hoping someone would recognize the scene. But no family came forward. No one claimed him. No school remembered him. No neighbor had seen him. He became known only as the boy in the box. The case received nationwide attention. People speculated he had been abandoned by a poor family. Others believed he was the victim of a more deliberate crime. Some thought he had been raised in secret, perhaps hidden away and never formally registered. Theories spread over time. Some held weight. Many did not. One woman came forward years later with a disturbing story. She claimed her mother had bought the boy, abused him, and then killed him during a fit of rage. The woman said they dumped his body in the woods. Her account included chilling details that matched the autopsy. But the story could not be confirmed, and the woman had a history of mental illness. Another theory pointed to a nearby foster home. Investigators noted that similar blankets had been seen there. Some even claimed the boy resembled children known to have stayed at the facility. But the connection was never proven, and the home denied involvement. For decades, the boy's grave sat unmarked. A small headstone was added later, reading America's Unknown Child. Over time, the case grew colder. Generations passed, but the haunting image of the boy remained. His face, reconstructed in sketches and clay models, stared out from posters and television screens. For many, he became a symbol of every child forgotten, every story left unfinished. In 1998, his body was exhumed to collect DNA. It was a difficult process, but the samples were preserved and stored for future testing. Years passed. The world changed, but the mystery held. Then, in 2022, everything shifted. New technology in forensic genealogy allowed scientists to revisit the DNA. Working with distant relatives and public databases, investigators traced the boy's family tree. And finally, after 65 years, the boy in the box was given a name: Joseph Augustus Zorelli. He was 4 years old when he died, born in 1953. He had brothers, a mother, a father. All were still alive at the time of the identification. But even with his name returned, questions remained. The details of his life are still unclear. His cause of death is still undetermined, and no charges have ever been filed. We now know who he was, but we still do not know why he died or how his small body ended up in a cardboard box in the woods of a quiet Philadelphia suburb. Joseph's story was nearly lost, but his memory endured. Today, his grave bears his real name. Visitors leave flowers, toys, and quiet prayers. A child who was once unknown is now remembered. And though the silence still lingers around his final moments, the world finally speaks his name. Let us now follow that silence again, this time across oceans into the strange stillness of a man found on an Australian beach. A man without a name and without a past. On the first morning of December 1948, a man's body was discovered on Somerton Beach near Adelaide, Australia. He was sitting against a seawall, legs outstretched, head leaning back slightly. At first glance, he appeared to be sleeping, but he was not. The man was dead. He wore a neatly pressed suit. His shoes were polished. There were no signs of a struggle, no bruises, no blood. In his pockets were a bus ticket, an unused train ticket, a pack of chewing gum, and a box of matches. What stood out most was what was missing. No wallet, no identification, no name. The tags had been cut from every piece of clothing he wore. No hat, no luggage nearby. It was as if someone had erased his identity before leaving him there. The autopsy revealed something strange. The man had an enlarged spleen and signs of internal bleeding, but no visible wounds. Toxicologists suspected poisoning, but no foreign substances were found in his system. Even the method of death remained a mystery. Days later, police searched a nearby train station and discovered an unclaimed suitcase. Inside were neatly folded clothes, some tools, and an unusual item, a spool of orange thread not sold in Australia. Some of the items had labels, but none provided a name. Handwriting on some documents suggested a European background, possibly Eastern European, but the trail led nowhere. Then, a discovery changed everything. Hidden in a small pocket of the man's pants was a tightly rolled piece of paper. It had 2 words printed on it, Tamam Shud. The phrase means ended or finished in Persian. It had been torn from the final page of a book, The Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. Police made a public appeal, and someone came forward. A local man had found a copy of the Rubaiyat in the back seat of his car, parked not far from the beach. The final page had been torn out a match for the slip of paper found on the body. Inside the book were faint pencil markings. A code. 5 lines of seemingly random letters. Below the code was a phone number. Police traced it to a woman living in a nearby suburb. She denied knowing the dead man, though she seemed visibly shaken when shown a cast of his face. Her name was never publicly released. The code, even today, has never been cracked. The identity of the Somerton Man remained unknown for over 70 years. Artists recreated his face. Theories spread. Was he a spy? A jilted lover? A traveler who met a quiet end? No one knew. In 2022, scientists exhumed his body to analyze DNA using advanced forensic genealogy. They traced his ancestry, and finally, the Somerton Man was identified as Carl Webb, an electrical engineer and instrument maker from Melbourne. Still, mysteries remained. Why was he in Adelaide? Who was the woman connected to the book? How did he die? Carl Webb's name may now be known, but his story remains incomplete. His final moments are still hidden beneath layers of time, sealed by silence and sea air. Let us drift now from the shores of Australia to the quiet suburbs of Missouri, where 3 women vanished without a sound. On the morning of June 7th, 1992, the sun rose quietly over Springfield, Missouri. It was a Sunday, warm, calm, graduation weekend. But inside a small, tidy home on East Delmar Street, something was wrong. Susie Streeter and Stacy McCall had just graduated from Kickapoo High School. They were bright, cheerful, and full of plans. The night before, they had joined friends to celebrate, bouncing between parties, laughing, and talking about the summer ahead. Susie's mother, Cheryl Levitt, was home that night. She had gone to bed early, expecting Susie to return. Cheryl worked as a cosmetologist. She was dependable and gentle. She lived in the small home with Susie, just the 2 of them. At around 2 in the morning, Susie and Stacy left the final party and went back to Susie's house to spend the night. They were supposed to go to a water park the next morning with friends. They never showed up. By 8 that morning, people began calling and knocking. No one answered. When a friend came by the house, they found the front door unlocked. The lights were on. The television played softly. Cinnamon, Susie's small dog, was anxious but unharmed. 3 women had vanished without explanation. Their belongings had not been taken. Cheryl's purse was near her bed. Susie's jewelry sat on the dresser. Stacy's clothes were folded neatly. Her graduation gown, still fresh from the night before, was draped carefully over a chair. Their cigarettes, which both women usually carried, had been left behind. Even the beds looked as if they had been slept in. One strange detail stood out. The glass cover over the porch light had been broken. A broom was found nearby, as if someone had tried to clean up the shards. No one knows who broke the light or when. Police arrived, but the scene had already been disturbed. Friends and family had come in and out of the house. The answering machine had been played. A disturbing voicemail, remembered by one visitor, had already been erased by the time officers took control. Despite this, there were no signs of a robbery or struggle. The rooms were still. Nothing was turned over. No blood. No fingerprints. No witnesses. The neighborhood had heard nothing in the night. Theories formed quickly. Some suspected an abduction. Others believed someone the women knew had entered the home, perhaps coaxing them out willingly. A green van was spotted near the house around the time of their disappearance. Others claimed to see Susie and Stacy later that day, walking with an unidentified man. None of these reports led anywhere. The local police were soon joined by the FBI. Psychics offered visions. Tip lines rang constantly. A psychic claimed the women were buried near a local hospital. That area was searched, but nothing was found. The families offered rewards. Press conferences were held, but no trace of the women was ever uncovered. In 2007, a man named Robert Craig Cox, who had a history of violent crimes, told a reporter he knew what happened. He claimed the women had been murdered and that their bodies would never be found. He refused to say more. Police could not verify his claims, and he was never charged. Over the years, the families never stopped hoping. They hosted candlelight vigils, shared memories with reporters, updated missing persons posters. Case remained in the headlines, especially each year on the anniversary of the disappearance. But time continued to pass. The house on East Delmar Street was eventually sold. New owners moved in. The porch light was replaced. The dog was gone. The curtains changed. But that quiet summer morning remained frozen in memory. 3 women, a home filled with ordinary details, and a vanishing that left no sound, no clue, no goodbye. Now, we leave behind the streets of Springfield and turn toward the open farmland of Minnesota, where a young man's voice disappeared into the night with nothing but a final whisper of fear. On the night of May 14th, 2008, a 19-year-old named Brandon Swanson disappeared along a rural road in western Minnesota. He had just finished his first year at college and was heading home to Marshall after a small celebration with friends. The night was dark. The roads were quiet. Brandon drove alone. Around 1:30 in the morning, his car veered off the road into a shallow ditch. The vehicle was not damaged, and Brandon wasn't hurt, but he couldn't get the car to move. Frustrated but calm, he pulled out his phone and called his parents for help. He told them he thought he was near the town of Lind, only a few miles from home. His father got in the car and drove out to find him. They stayed on the phone, trying to coordinate landmarks and flashing headlights. But something didn't make sense. Brandon described fences and gravel roads. He said he could see lights in the distance, but his father couldn't find him anywhere near Lind. For nearly 45 minutes, they stayed on the line. Brandon grew more frustrated. He said he was going to walk toward the lights he believed were in Lind and ask his father to pick him up there. The last words he ever spoke came just before the call ended. "Oh, no." Then silence. The line went dead. His parents tried calling back, but Brandon didn't answer. The next morning, the sheriff's office was contacted, and a search began. It didn't take long to find Brandon's car, but it wasn't near Lind. It was about 25 miles away, near the town of Taunton. No one knows why he believed he was near Lind. He was familiar with the area. He had driven those roads before. But that night, something had gone wrong. A wrong turn. A misjudged landmark. Or maybe something else. Search teams combed the fields and ditches. Dogs tracked Brandon's scent for nearly 3 miles, along gravel roads, through fields, and near a river. Then the trail stopped. Some believed he may have fallen into the water. But no clothing, no shoes, and no remains were ever recovered. His phone records showed that the call stayed active for nearly the entire walk. That meant Brandon had his phone in his hand, talking to his father for most of the journey. For years, the area around Taunton was searched. Volunteers joined helicopters, boats, and search dogs. The terrain was difficult. Water levels rose and fell. But nothing was found. Some believe Brandon met with foul play. Others think he became disoriented and lost in the dark. The land around the Yellow Medicine River can be confusing at night, filled with winding paths and open fields that stretch for miles. But without evidence, there is only silence. Brandon's parents never stopped searching. They pushed for stronger laws to help families of missing adults. In Minnesota, the Brandon Law was passed in 2009, requiring authorities to take missing person reports immediately, regardless of age or perceived risk. His disappearance became one of the most haunting cases in the Midwest. A quiet young man, a phone call in the night, a calm voice that suddenly turned to fear. Then nothing. More than 15 years have passed. His car is long gone. The fields have changed with the seasons. But Brandon's voice still echoes in the memory of that final call. Oh no. Let us now travel west to the foothills of California, where 5 men vanished on a cold night in winter, leaving behind a car full of clues and a trail that only deepened the mystery. On the evening of February 24th, 1978, 5 men from Yuba County, California, climbed into a turquoise and white Mercury Montego. They were headed to a basketball game at Chico State. For them, it was a night of excitement, routine, and friendship. The 5 men were all between 24 and 32 years old. All of them lived at home with their families. Each had mild intellectual disabilities or psychiatric conditions, but they were high-functioning and active in their community. They were known to love sports, especially basketball. They were scheduled to play in a tournament the next day for a team sponsored by a program for the mentally handicapped. Winners would get a trip to Los Angeles. Bill Sterling, Jack Hewitt, Ted Weyer, Jack Madruga, Gary Mathias, friends since childhood. That night, they never came home. After the game ended, they got back in the car and began the journey south toward Yuba City. But somewhere along the way, something went wrong. The next day, their families panicked. No one had seen or heard from the 5 men. Police searched highways, back roads, and towns between Chico and Yuba. Days later, they found the Mercury Montego abandoned high in the Plumas National Forest, 70 miles from Chico. It was far off any route they should have been driving. The car was not stuck. It had gas in the tank. The keys were missing, but the doors were unlocked. It appeared to have been left deliberately. Inside the car, everything was orderly. Candy wrappers, maps, and programs from the game were still there. The seats were undisturbed. The engine had no damage. Police could not understand why the men had driven so far off course into the snowy mountains. In June, 4 months later, a group of motorcyclists came across a deserted U.S. Forest Service trailer deep in the woods, nearly 20 miles from the abandoned car. Inside, they found the body of Ted Weyer. He was lying on a bed, covered with several blankets. His beard was long, indicating he had survived for weeks. His shoes were missing, and his feet were severely frostbitten. Nearby, there was a storage shed containing enough food to feed 5 men for months. It had been unopened. He had starved to death. Searchers found the remains of Bill Sterling and Jack Madruga nearby. Their bodies were scattered in a wooded area, partially consumed by animals. A few days later, searchers found bones belonging to Jack Hewitt, about 2 miles from the trailer. Only Gary Mathias was never found. His shoes were in the trailer, suggesting he had been there at some point. But no trace of him was ever discovered. He had a history of schizophrenia, but was stable on medication. His disappearance added even more confusion. The families were left with painful questions. Why had the men driven into the mountains? Why abandon the car when it was perfectly functional? Why didn't they open the food supply? What happened to Gary? Some theorized they had followed a wrong turn and panicked in the dark. Others believed they were chased, or that someone had forced them off course. There were no signs of violence, no tracks, no clear answers. Despite national attention, no conclusive theory has ever been proven. The Yuba County Five became a legend of mystery, a story of friendship, fear, and choices made in silence. Car, the trailer, the forest, all pieces of a puzzle that never came together. Their families remember them not as a mystery, but as sons and brothers, as young men who loved basketball and laughed together, who never came back down from the mountain. And so we follow the silence westward, across the sea, to a distant valley in Norway, where a woman's identity vanished with her final breath, and her secrets burned beside her. On the chilly afternoon of November 29th, 1970, a man and his 2 young daughters went hiking through a remote part of the Isdal Valley, just outside Bergen, Norway. The trail was quiet, the air still, and their path cut through dense woods and sharp hills. This area was not often visited. Locals called it Death Valley because of past accidents, including suicides and strange disappearances. That name would soon take on new weight. As they neared a rocky slope, the man caught the faint scent of smoke. Then they saw her. A woman's body lay sprawled across the stones. Her back rested against the incline. Her arms were bent at her sides. Her front was badly burned. Her face was unrecognizable. Her clothing was charred. Near her were several objects: a fur hat, a bottle of liquor, sleeping pills, and a half-burned passport. The scene was unsettling, not only for what was there, but for what was missing. Police were called to the site. Investigators quickly realized the woman's identity had been deliberately erased. All labels had been cut from her clothing. Her belongings bore no fingerprints. The tags on her suitcase had been removed. Even the prescription labels on a bottle of lotion had been scraped away. Later, police found 2 suitcases stored at the Bergen railway station. They belonged to the woman. Inside were clothing items, wigs, German and Norwegian currency, a notepad filled with code-like markings, and maps. One suitcase contained a prescription for lotion, but again, the label had been removed. In the lining of one suitcase, police found fragments of paper with travel notes written in block letters. Decoding the notes revealed a series of dates and cities across Norway and Europe. In each place, the woman had registered at hotels under false names and nationalities. She often claimed to be Belgian, sometimes German. Her accent shifted. She carried at least 8 identities, none of which were real. Hotel staff remembered her. She had striking eyes, dark hair, and a graceful manner. She spoke calmly, sometimes in broken English, sometimes in fluent French or German. She always paid in cash and preferred to keep to herself. At one hotel, she requested a room with a balcony facing the mountains. At another, she asked to move rooms because she disliked the window view. Her choices were precise, controlled. An autopsy revealed she had taken more than 50 sleeping pills. A bruise was found on her neck. Her lungs contained no smoke, suggesting she was already dead before the fire began. Her death was ruled a probable suicide, but many found that difficult to believe. Why would someone go to such lengths to hide her identity, then choose such a painful and exposed way to die? Cold War tensions were high in Norway at the time. Bergen was near key military installations, including sites used for testing advanced naval weapons. Some speculated she was a spy. Others believed she was involved in organized crime. No agency ever claimed her, and no government ever stepped forward. Over the decades, the mystery only deepened. Her dental work suggested she had spent time in Central or Eastern Europe. Her handwriting hinted at French or Belgian schooling. Isotope analysis of her teeth and bones placed her childhood somewhere near the German border. Still, no missing persons report matched her. No family ever came forward. She was buried in a simple grave in Bergen. Her coffin was sealed in zinc in case future investigators needed to retrieve her remains. At the funeral, police and clergy stood in silence. No mourners, no name spoken aloud. In 2016, Norwegian journalists revisited the case with modern forensic tools. They reconstructed her face and reanalyzed her DNA. The evidence confirmed she was likely born around 1930 and had roots in Germany. But her true name remained unknown. To this day, she is remembered only as the Isdal Woman, a figure who moved quietly through European cities, changing her identity again and again until her final hours brought her to the foot of a cold Norwegian hill. She walked with secrets. She died with silence, and her story lingers like mist in the forest, never settling, never revealing what lay behind her many masks. Now we return to America's quiet South, where a child disappeared on a rainy February morning, leaving behind a mystery that still breaks hearts today. In the early hours of February 14th, 2000, a soft rain fell across Shelby, North Carolina. The wind rattled old window panes. Trees swayed in the darkness. It was just before dawn when 9-year-old Asha Degree quietly slipped out of bed, picked up her book bag, and walked out the front door into the storm. Her home was still. Her parents slept down the hall. Her older brother shared the same room and had last seen her tucked under the covers. The house was locked, but Asha knew how to open the door without a sound. She took nothing but her backpack and the clothes she was wearing. When her parents woke around 6:30 in the morning, they found her bed empty. Panic spread quickly. They called police, then family. Friends began searching nearby fields and ditches, but there were no signs of forced entry. No footprints in the muddy yard, just silence. As officers searched, strange witness reports came in. Around 4 in the morning, 2 motorists spotted a small figure walking alone down Highway 18, just outside of town. It was dark and raining hard. One driver turned his car around to help, but as he approached, the girl bolted into the woods. Days later, searchers found small items in a nearby shed, a pencil, a marker, candy wrappers, and a hair bow. All belonged to Asha. The shed stood a short distance from where she had last been seen. Its door was unlocked. Inside, everything was quiet. Still, no one knew why she had left. Asha was known for her caution. She was careful, kind, and quiet. She was a good student who avoided risk. She had no history of running away, and there had been no arguments at home. She had gone to bed, happy, excited about Valentine's Day events planned for school the next morning. The idea of her walking alone into a stormy night was unthinkable. Her parents believed she had been lured outside, perhaps by someone she had spoken to without their knowledge. Someone she trusted. But no such person was ever identified. 1 year passed. Then, nearly 30 miles from Shelby, construction workers discovered a plastic bag buried off a rural highway. Inside was Asha's backpack, still zipped shut. It contained her school supplies, personal items, and a t-shirt with a New Kids on the Block logo. Her family had never seen the shirt before. Investigators believed someone had buried the bag intentionally. It was not carelessly tossed. It was sealed, dry, and placed deep in the soil. They hoped fingerprints or DNA might be found, but none ever were. Over time, the trail went cold. In 2015, the FBI released an age-progressed photo showing what Asha might look like as a teenager. Her family cooperated with every search, every interview. They handed out flyers, kept her story alive, and never moved from the home she had left. To this day, no trace of her has been found beyond the backpack and those early items in the shed. The case continues to haunt investigators. No suspects. No confirmed sightings. No clear motive. Just a girl walking alone on a highway in the dark, carrying a backpack too large for her small frame. Asha Degree's story lives on in North Carolina's memory. She was 9 years old. She vanished in the early morning rain. Her smile still looks out from posters, flyers, and news stories that repeat the same unanswered question. Why did she leave? And where did she go? Now we move toward the final mystery in our quiet journey. A woman who built her life from nothing. A wife and mother. A stranger, even to those closest to her. Her secrets were kept for decades, until one locked box pulled her past into the light. On the morning of Christmas Eve, in the year 2010, in the quiet town of Longview, Texas, police arrived at the home of Lori Erica Ruff. The air was cold. Holiday lights flickered on porches up and down the street. But in the driveway of one modest brick house, a car sat still, engine off. Inside was Lori, no longer alive. She had died by suicide, leaving behind a shaken family and a quiet storm of unanswered questions. Lori had been married, the mother of a young daughter. Her husband had recently moved out. The couple had struggled through years of tension and emotional distance. Her behavior had grown more withdrawn. Her in-laws described her as anxious and guarded, rarely speaking about her life before marriage. In the days that followed, Laurie's grieving relatives began sorting through her belongings. Inside a closet, behind a stack of boxes, they found a strong box. Heavy, locked. When they managed to open it, they found items that would unravel the identity they thought they knew. Inside were documents under different names. The most important was a birth certificate for a girl named Becky Sue Turner, a child who had died in a house fire in Washington State in 1971 at just 2 years old. In 1988, someone had requested a copy of that birth certificate. That someone was Laurie. She had assumed Becky Sue Turner's identity, used it to obtain new documents, and then changed her name legally to Laurie Erica Kennedy. From that point forward, she lived as if she had always been Laurie. She went to church, got married in Texas, had a child, and stayed carefully guarded. Her in-laws were stunned. They had known something was unusual. Laurie had always avoided questions about her past. She claimed to have no living relatives. She offered few details about her childhood. She was polite, but distant, never truly at ease. Once authorities got involved, they found no records of Laurie prior to the late 1980s. No social security activity. No school transcripts. No driver's license history. It was as if she had created herself from nothing. Investigators began combing through the documents in the box. Some were scribbled with cryptic notes, numbers, and references to towns and dates. One note contained what seemed like a list of random locations. Others held Bible verses, crossed out names, and disjointed thoughts. To some, they looked like clues. To others, signs of mental illness. The mystery spread quickly. The FBI joined the search. Journalists and online sleuths began piecing together timelines and theories. Who was this woman who had erased her identity and lived an entirely fabricated life? Some speculated she had been abused and was fleeing a dangerous past. Others wondered if she had committed a crime long ago and feared being discovered. But no evidence of criminal behavior ever emerged. Just silence. Then, in 2016, a breakthrough came. A forensic genealogist used DNA samples from Laurie's daughter and submitted them to ancestry databases. After months of research, her true identity was finally revealed. Laurie Erica Ruff had been born Kimberly McLean in 1969 in Pennsylvania. She had grown up in a suburban neighborhood outside Philadelphia. Her early life had been marked by conflict. She left home in her 20s, telling her family she wanted nothing more to do with them. She disappeared soon after. Her parents honored her wishes, never contacting her again. They had no idea she had reinvented herself completely, moved to Texas, and started a new life under a different name. When the truth came out, Kimberly's family expressed sorrow. They had not known where she had gone. They believed she simply needed space. What they could not have known was that their daughter would vanish behind a carefully constructed wall of secrecy, guarded until her final day. The reasons for her disappearance remain unclear. No confession, no journal, no final explanation. Just those mysterious papers and the quiet weight of 2 decades spent hiding in plain sight. Laurie, or Kimberly, was not a spy or a fugitive. She was a woman who chose silence over explanation, distance over truth. Her identity was not stolen from others, but crafted anew. Her secrets may never be fully known. Today, she is remembered as one of the most perplexing cases of personal reinvention in modern history. A woman who vanished without ever leaving. A mother, a wife, a ghost in her own life story. She rests now with both names behind her, one given at birth, one taken by choice, and in between, a life lived somewhere in the quiet shadows between memory and myth. The final story has now settled. The last voice has faded in quiet. 10 lives, still waiting for truth, have gently passed through your thoughts. If sleep has found you, stay where you are. Let stillness keep you company. If you remain awake, let curiosity rest for now. The questions will wait. They always do. Thank you for listening. You are not alone in wondering. We'll return soon with more. Good night.